What we now know as the hymn Jerusalem first appeared in the preface to William Blake's epic poem, Milton, a poem in 2 books in the early 19th century. It became a hymn when Hubert Parry set it to music at the start of the 20th century. At its heart, the hymn is a rallying cry to transform the country we live in for the better, never ceasing to strive for the justice and peace of the New Jerusalem on earth. Christ the Lord is risen again was written by Michael Weiss, a pastor in Bohemia at the time of Martin Luther. It was translated into English by Catherine Winkworth in the 19th century, and here it is sung to a medieval French tune, Orientis Partibus. Like so many other great Easter hymns, it celebrates the death and resurrection of Jesus, now enthroned in heaven in glory.
Christ the Lord is Be strong in the Lord. Today, St. George's Day, is the day we remember the patron saint of England. He's also the patron saint of Georgia, Portugal and Malta, among other places too. But why does a country have a patron saint? The idea of having a patron is to have somebody strong who's on your side, who can make you successful, someone who will look out for you, make it all go well. A person close to God as a patron saint who can pray for you and your country, rather like a guardian angel. But why does England have St. George? There are two sides to his identity. Although history is a bit sketchy, he seems to have come from eastern Turkey, had a Greek father and a Palestinian mother. He ended up as a commanding officer in the Roman army, living in Lydda, a city near Tel Aviv in modern Israel. As a Christian in the army, he refused to sacrifice to the emperor and was tortured and martyred for his faith around the year 300 AD. And a rich tradition of prayer and miracle done by him grew up in Palestine, and St. George over the centuries has been revered and still is by Muslims and some Jews as well as Christians as a strong holy man. He's very much revered as a saint in churches around the Mediterranean. 3 years ago I went to the papal visit of the Coptic Pope of Alexandria, to Wadros I, His Holiness, in the Coptic Cathedral in Stevenage, and on my mantelpiece I keep an icon of St. George, a copy, which we were given when we were leaving the service. Here it is. St. George has inspired generations of Christians and Copts and others who've been ready to stand up for their faith and suffer and die for Jesus Christ. But that's not why he's England's patron saint. When English soldiers went to conquer Palestine in the Middle Ages, they discovered the story of St. George, and they popularised the legend that he was a Christian knight who killed a dragon to save a princess from being eaten. That's what these English soldiers were looking for in a powerful patron saint to bring them success in battle. One is a soldier who they could identify with. And so they brought back to England the flag of St. George, a red cross on a white background, and a devotion to him as a patron saint, an inspiration and protector for soldiers and knights. If you've ever come across William Shakespeare's play Henry V, you may know the famous speech by the king rallying his troops. "Once more unto the breach, dear friends, once more. Cry God for Harry, England and St. George." St. George had become a figure of power for the English to call on, someone who was strong, who would help you win your battles. But the real St. George is more surprising, and not about that kind of strength at all. Remember, George is an international figure, an ordinary person, a soldier, who refused to fight physically in order to win the spiritual battles of life. And in our reading in this short service, St. Paul uses the image of a soldier to remind us of our spiritual battles and starts by saying, be strong, not be strong in yourself, but be strong in the Lord. Have a closer look at that Coptic icon of St. George. He's not wearing the armour of a soldier. His lance with which he slays the dragon is in the shape of a cross. The red cloak billowing out behind him symbolises blood, but not the blood of his dragon or his human enemies, but his own blood, shed by his persecutors, because he was faithful to Jesus Christ. The dragons George had to face as a soldier of Christ were fear, suffering and death. And he's remembered for his courage, his resilience, his endurance of suffering, his concern for others. Sometimes St. George gets misused. I've seen the flag of St. George used to exclude others, as a symbol of being English over against being part of God's wider human family, used as a means of power over people, rather than having the power to suffer on behalf of Jesus Christ and of others. In these days, when our national resilience is being tested, when we need to work together as never before, when many of us face suffering and danger, and some face death, let's take courage from St. George to find our strength in following Jesus Christ in life and through death, with love and faith and hope. Be strong in the Lord.
Ye Choirs of New Jerusalem was written in Latin in the early 11th century by St Fulbert, Bishop of Chartres, and translated into English in the 19th century by Robert Campbell. Throughout the Bible, the phrase New Jerusalem refers to the hope that God would come to save God's people and that all would live together in peace and harmony. This hymn celebrates Jesus' resurrection as the moment when this longed-for future begins.